Welcome back to Season 3 of How to Smash the Motherhood Penalty. This podcast is brought to you 100% by Works for Everyone, which is my business, Emma McLean. We are a professional development company that partners with New Zealand corporates to help them retain and grow their working parent talent. And we are so delighted to do that through leadership programs, executive coaching, and systemic change initiatives like this podcast and the New Zealand Part-Time Power List. So welcome aboard and thank you for listening. I have been loving talking to all the listeners who have reached out about how much they enjoyed Season 2, Making Space for Dads. And in this season, we're going to continue to mix it up. We've got some fantastic interviews coming up, all having the motherhood penalty at its heart, because we still need to talk about this. If you have enjoyed the podcast, please make sure you subscribe to it. Subscriptions don't cost anything, but it just means that you'll be the very first to know about the new episode that comes out. And if you are interested in more working parent content, come and follow me on Instagram, Works for Everyone. I often post working parent hints and tips and also video clips of these interviews. But enough about me. Back to my guests. See you soon. Kia ora koutou, it's your friend Emma here, and today I am delighted to be with Rachel Carrell, founder and CEO of Koru Kids, a business that solves a real problem for parents, which is why I am so delighted to talk to her. Rachel is joining us all the way from England via the delights of the internet, so anything could happen. It's a Monday morning for her. It's a heat wave and it's the first day of Wimbledon. So I'm pretty excited to be talking to you, Rachel. Welcome.
Hello. Yeah, kia ora. It's very cool to be talking to Kiwi.
So why don't you introduce yourself a bit more, share a bit of your story. I'd love you to introduce yourself in whatever way you'd love to do that.
Well, I am from Invercargill originally. And I went to Otago and did my undergrad there. And then I was lucky enough to get an opportunity to come over and study further in England. And at the time, I thought I would just be here for a couple of years. I was going to do my master's and go home, but I got distracted for about 25 years. And so I'm still here now. And I've married an Englishman, got 3 kids who all have English accents. They do have Kiwi passports, though. I do make it home. I actually try to come home every year. So I've been home like an insane amount. My kids have been, my 10-year-old's been to New Zealand like 10 times. So trying very, very hard to maintain those links. And so what I've been doing is I ended up staying on to do a doctorate. I was at university for a very long time. And then I started working in London and became a CEO of a healthcare company. And then I had my first baby at that time about 10 years ago. Mm. And then started realizing how bad the childcare system was over here. It's actually bad, I think, in most countries. I think hardly anywhere has actually solved this problem. But anyway, it also is bad in the UK. And so I really, really wanted to work on that problem. And I also have always, my whole life, wanted to start a business ever since I was a kid. And so those two things kind of came together. And I decided to launch my business here and to make it focus on childcare and helping people find great nannies, but really it's not just a nanny finding service. We had to build a whole parallel system. So it took years and years and years of build to get it right. But I think we have now. And so that's what I'm doing.
That's amazing. And you're right. No, childcare is not fixed anywhere, right? It's a problem in all countries, and it's infrastructure. It's the infrastructure that allows parents to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And it drives me crazy that it's not respected as infrastructure, If the kind of holes that are in our childcare infrastructure was in some of our other kinds of infrastructure, like if our trains had just gaps, if our, it's funny actually, talking about that in New Zealand, it's like, well, actually we don't have a brilliant public transport system. But, people complain about that, and they should, because that is a terrible public infrastructure. And I think childcare equally should be complained about in the same way, as if like suddenly a third of our roads didn't exist overnight. That's the way that we should be talking about it. And so that's really the way that I see what I'm doing, is plugging the holes in what should be basic fundamental infrastructure.
And it should be funded as well, in a way, right? Like it should be funded like all our infrastructure is funded, like roads are funded, childcare should be funded. But instead, I mean, I just saw a post, I think your account just shared, around how the cost of childcare has gone up so much and salaries have not. It's positioned as a personal budgeting failure, but it's actually a structural failure.
Yeah, totally. And there's tons of evidence that having great childcare really underpins economic growth as well. So you're right. It is really talked about as though it is a very personal decision. It's a personal choice to have kids. You know, you sometimes hear this kind of, well, if you couldn't afford to have kids, why did you have them? And I guess at the extreme, you can see some, you know, you can see something in that argument. But the problem is, if we all take that attitude and we all say, okay, well, we'll only have kids if we can afford to keep the childcare costs to a manageable percentage of our salary, let's say 15% or something like that, 20%, which seems reasonable. Almost no one can actually do that. Only the very, very, very richest people can do that. And so if we actually as a society decided to do that, then population rates would plummet. And guess what's actually happening right now? Population rates are plummeting, and it's for many reasons, but a huge part of it is the cost of bringing up kids, and childcare is a huge part of that. So at the societal level, if we want to take care of our old people and have our economies, you know, not completely combust, we actually do need to fund childcare publicly. It's not a personal individual decision. It has to be societal.
Yes, Queen. I'll vote for you. Yes.
I'll carry on talking. I could do this for an hour, dude.
Totally agree. Back to your business. One of the things I love about your business is the way that you talk about it on your website around, do you need to find an after-school nanny, a full-time nanny, a school holiday nanny? And I think that's a really clever marketing kind of segmentation thing, right? Because that's what parents need. They need these different kinds.
Yeah, it's a frustration of mine that even when people do talk about childcare or try to solve the childcare problem, they usually try to solve it for the central kind of really mainstream need, which is like babies 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And there's kind of this idea that that's what that's what parents need like, and some do for sure, but a huge and growing percentage of parents want something that is completely different. They might need an early start because they work shifts. They might need a late one for the same reason. A hugely increasing percentage of families have children with special needs, and they might be completely overwhelmed by solutions like, oh, let's just have after school care that goes until 6 o'clock in the school hall where they're all kind of running around and rowdy. Some kids love that. And that could be like the best part of the day if you've got a really energetic, rowdy, rambunctious kid. But a lot of kids, that is just their absolute nightmare. They're already exhausted and overwhelmed, and it's the last thing that they need. You know, and lots of parents might work in shifts that change around. I always think about nurses. You know, so many things make it hard to be a nurse. One of them is you only get your shifts, let's say 6 weeks in advance, and they move around. That is so hard to find childcare for. It's almost the hardest thing to find childcare for. And so when I set up Koru Kids, I really did not make it life easy for myself, because the easy thing to do is to provide the kind of central case, and the really hard kind of childcare. Like solving that nurse's problem is the hardest problem in childcare, because they don't have a lot of money. They can't just like throw money at the problem. And the problem itself is very difficult. And so what I always say to my team is what we're building towards is being able to solve that nurse's problem. And if we can solve that problem, then we can solve kind of anyone's problem, because it's really hard. And so what I wanted to do with Koru Kids is to go after the little small, flexible, tough bits. So after school care is a good example. Your kids finish here in London, kids generally finish around about 3:30 from school. And then if you've got your commute and everything, you might not be home until, let's say, 6:30, something like that, 6 or 6:30. And finding someone who is good enough to look after your kids, but only needs a job for 3 hours a day, that's actually a really tough intersection of people to find, right? And so that's what I've spent the last 10 years basically getting really good at finding those people and really understanding what makes someone great at looking after kids. And it's not necessarily about qualifications. A lot of what we've learned is that it's a lot more about your intrinsic warmth and your other kinds of experience that you've had. But we've got really, really good at finding these people. And last year, we actually had over 100,000 applications to become a Koru Kids after school nanny.
Wow.
And we say publicly we take less than 10%. It's actually even more selective than that. We actually take less than 6%. I think it's harder to get into Koru Kids as a nanny than it is to get into Harvard, actually, statistically.
Brilliant.
It's kind of a fun
We
stat.
love that. We love that.
But it's because it's really important to get these people right. But even so, when you're existing at that scale, it means we have tens of thousands of these nannies, and we now pick up, about 3,000 kids a day.
Amazing. That's incredible. And it's taken you 10 years to craft this, right? There is no overnight success.
Oh my goodness. It so isn't. And if you tell me, like when I first started this business, I thought I'd crack it in 18 months. I thought that was slow. I was like, I'll be conservative. I remember talking to people and I was like, it's not going to happen overnight. Like, I reckon it'll be about 18 months. But it is so hard. It's just, you're dealing with people on both sides. You're dealing with kids. It's very high risk. You have to really get all your safeguarding and vetting. It has to be perfect, like no room for error. Just building the logistics and building up the supply in many different geographies, it's hard, and it's hard to find these people. So that's why it's taken so long.
And tell me about your business at the moment, the size of your business, the scale of your business, where you're operating.
So we started off just in London, and we were just in London for about the first 3-4 years. And then we went outside London. We're now in about 15 cities. We basically throughout the UK, although what we do works best in cities. So sadly, this is like a future step. I would love to solve the problem of people living out in the country. And that is even harder. I mean, the nurse who lives out in the country is like probably the actual hardest. How on earth do you solve that
maybe
problem?
It's the nurse parenting alone living out in the country. I mean,
yeah, exactly. A special needs child. That is really hard. But who wants them to learn Mandarin Chinese and needs a driver? But so we're gradually kind of moving out. So now we're in places like Manchester and Sheffield and Brighton and Birmingham. We're up in Scotland now. We're in Edinburgh and Glasgow. And we're actually growing faster outside London than we are inside London at the moment. It's been quite interesting over here post the pandemic. A lot of people moved out of London. We've had a lot of families have moved out of London. And so actually we've had a lot of primary schools that are closing down in London. So we've kind of mirrored that. So we are still growing in London because we're growing as a business, but we're growing much faster outside London.
Wow, that's super interesting. Super interesting. How does your pricing work, right? Because that was one thing I thought, like, I totally agree with you about shift workers. I totally agree with you about nurses. And the challenge is to find a service that it's a problem that people can pay for, right? So how do you manage the pricing?
Tricky.
Yeah.
It's so tricky for us. So we don't receive any public funding at all. And that's what I think really needs to happen in order for it to become actually properly affordable. So I never want to describe what we do as affordable childcare because for many families, it just isn't affordable. But what we can do is we can offer people that can work only the hours that you need. So rather than having to hire someone for like 30 hours, when all you need is 5 hours, you can just hire them for 5 hours. And then the second thing we can do is we can find someone who doesn't have extra experience and qualifications that you don't need. So if you've got a 7-year-old, let's say 7 or 8-year-old, and what you need is them to be picked up from school, take them home, kick a ball around in the garden, if that's what they need. You don't need someone who's studied like babies for 3 years and has like an early childhood qualification, which you're going to be paying for. That's actually just not relevant for your situation. So actually for you, it might be perfect to find like a 20-year-old history student who's going to a great university, who, you know, has like the right vibes, the right energy for your kid, and who your kid's going to have an amazing time with. And that person, if they weren't doing this job, they might be working in a bar or, you know, working in retail or something, and they might be on minimum wage. So they're very excited to take this job, and because them it's really, really fun. So it's about just trying to like match the exact right thing. So we make it as affordable. We do everything we can to make it as affordable as we possibly can. And sadly, there's just a limit to that, because everyone needs to be paid, you know, our nannies need to be paid like proper wage as well. There's just a limit to how much we can actually do that without public funding. And it's definitely something that I campaign quite a lot on to try and increase the amount of funding available.
Because do nurseries get funded in the UK? Are they?
They do, yeah. They do. And it's really, again, it comes back to this, it's kind of what I was alluding to at the start, that when people do think about childcare, they usually think about the most common central case. So if they think about a baby or a toddler, they don't think about these little slivers of time. Like, they really, after school care in particular, is so neglected that there's this sort of assumption that when your kids go to school, your childcare problems are over. And you hear even parents will say this, parents who don't realize it yet, right? You know, you hear, I hate it sometimes when I talk to someone with a baby and I say, you know, they're talking to me about how they're going to take a year of mat leave, and then they're going to have nursery, and then they're like, oh, you know, and then I'll really ramp up my career when they go to school. And I'm like, oh, right, we might be at a party or something. I'm like, oh, how much of a bummer do I want to be right now?
I know. It's like, I always say to my clients, I work with lots of clients that have young children under 5, and I always say, because we call it daycare here, I say daycare is the easiest, because it's like a long day as you work.
Yeah, exactly.
I do think that after school is just a complete, like, again, I mean, one thing that I'm passionate about is a motherhood penalty, and I see a lot of mums coming out of the workforce because of school, or going to very junior jobs, or taking a job at a school, even though they've been a business analyst, and then they're filling up sellotape dispensers just because they want the hours.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that was something that really made me want to work on this problem as a whole, actually, was just the profundity of the life decisions that people are forced to make because of the lack of childcare infrastructure. Because you can't get the right childcare, you decide not to have another child. You decide to move out of London to be closer to your parents. You decide to jack in the career that you've spent your whole university and career so far building. This is not like buying a lipstick. This is like some of the most profound decisions we can make as human beings. Am I going to bring a person into the world? Where am I going to live? What's my purpose? What's my life going to be about building? And I want people to be able to make those choices freely, not make them because they were forced to, because of a lack of childcare infrastructure.
Love, beautiful, so powerful. So powerful, because I think currently we're working in a system that doesn't work, but we're taking the impact of it, right? And mums particularly.
That is exactly it.
You know?
Yes, that is exactly it. We are like, you know, in your car you have shock absorbers. The mother is the shock absorber, particularly. I mean, okay, sometimes the dad to an extent, but really it is a lot still the mother. And so whenever there's an emergency, a shock to the system, the mother is like the sponge.
Yeah, we're the sponge, but we're also the glue. And there's metaphors abound. Here's a question for you, Rachel. We talk about mums and dads. If you think about your clients, who contacts you? Is it dads or is it mums?
Yeah. So it's about 90% mums, but we have actually noticed another kind of interesting, kind of sad thing, which is there's a sort of funny journey flow where often the dad might see us because we're kind of like we're a tech platform, and so we appear in some places that childcare businesses wouldn't normally appear, and because we're kind of like new and innovative and that sort of thing. So the dad might see us, the dad might then sign up. But then what happens is very quickly the dad often realizes he's out of his depth and he's not actually the decision maker. So he hands off to his wife, the mum then comes on and she does quite a lot of the kind of like interacting with the nannies and shortlisting and all that. But then what is fascinating to me is the dad comes back when it's time for contracting and sorting out the finances. So it's the dad who kind of like figures out we help people figure out their contract and if there's any negotiation. And that is often when the dad comes back. I mean, no judgment. Like that's a division. That is a division of labor. And if that's the way people want to divide labor, like cool. I don't think there's any problem with that necessarily, but I just think it's a super interesting pattern that we've noticed.
Exactly. And yeah, I mean, I think with all of this, we have to not use judgment, right? Because we're all swimming in this big system that still sends memos, invisible memos to dads on what their jobs are and invisible memos to mums on what their jobs are. And it's complicated, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's really complicated. Yeah. What about those parents parenting alone? I mean, is that a big portion of your base? Like,
yeah, it really is. And I think, it's obvious why. It's just so much harder. And as any parent knows, it's impossible to parent without a village. And if you don't have a natural village around you, you have to thoughtfully construct one. And paid help can be an incredibly important part of that. So yes, we do definitely see that.
Yes. I've noticed as well, there's another very small company that started to do something similar in New Zealand, and she has noticed that she's getting a lot of newly separated dads contacting her.
That's true. We get that too. Yeah.
So again, that's part of the life cycle, isn't it? There's all this life cycle of families, which is interesting. So what I'm curious about really, Rachel, when I say the words motherhood penalty, what comes into your mind? Like when I say motherhood penalty, what do you think of?
So I think of a dynamic that I often see, which is, I think, caused by the inequality between mat leave and maternity leave and paternity leave. Where in the UK, it's pretty normal to take a year off as a mother. I have to say, because I'm founder, I've got 3 kids, I took 1 day off for one of my births, just to put that in perspective. So this actually, I'm not talking about myself here, but everyone else, just in case anyone gets concerned that people in my company don't take proper mat leave, everyone else takes a year off, just not me. So don't worry. But anyway, but what typically happens is, so the government funded paternity leave is only 2 weeks, which is just so inadequate, it's beyond expression. And so what happens is you have that first year and everyone starts off parenthood completely clueless, right? No one knows how to change a nappy, when to change a nappy, how to soothe the baby, all the things and all the like vaccination schedule and all that. But at the end of a year, the mum has become an expert and she knows what vaccinations the kid has. She knows where the red book is, which is the sort of NHS, our little medical book. She's been to the GP loads of times. So she's all over all the health stuff. She knows what that cry means. She knows that rash wasn't there yesterday. All the things, right? And so the dad, by contrast, whenever he tries to do anything, is kind of naturally worse, right? And like kind of incompetent. And then at this point, some of the dads become strategically incompetent and find it quite convenient to be incompetent. And some of them, I'm sure are trying their best. There's like differences, right? But what happens then is if you fast forward 5 years, you find that it's still the mum who still knows who the GP is, the vaccination schedule. She's the one who filled out the school forms. Therefore, she's the one that gets called. Therefore, she's the one that gives up her voluntary time. And I see a lot of the seeds of this in that paternity-maternity inequality, which is why and then that translates through to their careers and to everything else in their life. And that's why I actually do quite a bit of campaigning about paternity leave. I think equalising paternity leave is one of the most important things that we could do to rejig this. And I look at countries like Sweden where they have use it or lose it paternity leave, which means that if you don't take up your paternity leave, it is completely lost, and you can't transfer it to the mother. It's gone. And because of that, in Sweden, dads are much more involved in the early life of their babies, and that, I'm told by Swedish friends, translates all the way through, and they become much more involved through the whole life of their child.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Sweden, because I was on a panel last week, and a lady from Sweden was there, and she said that her sister and brother-in-law took up the equal paid parental leave, but they're even more innovative than that in terms of the employers. So the employers let the dad take the mornings for 6 months, and then the mum took the
Wow.
afternoons for 6 months. And I guess
That's a game changer, isn't it?
it sets up family dynamics right from the
Yeah.
start. And, I think when it comes, I totally am with you for equal and shared paid parental leave as a big game changer. But I also think we need innovation in job design and childcare.
Yeah.
I mean, people go on about how innovative New Zealand is. Where's the innovation in job design? Where are the job shares? Where are the part-time roles? Senior, career building, not career ending. And where's the innovation in childcare? Like, we must have innovation and not have these same old solutions we're wheeling out.
Yeah, totally. And I see that there's definitely two sides of the coin as well. The UK has actually got a lot better in the last 5 years on this, I think driven by the pandemic. So what's just changed in the last couple of years is everyone now has a right to request flexible working arrangements. Doesn't mean they'll necessarily have to get them, but they have a formal legal right to request. And so when the employer gets a formal right to request, they have to reply formally, and they have to explain why it's not possible, which really puts the onus on them. They can't just say, no, we're not talking about it. They have to say, for these concrete business reasons, blah, 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 and they have to lay it out, and you can challenge it, and you can say that wasn't a good enough reason, which is, I think that's a huge step forward in terms of employment rights, to be able to do that. And the formal stuff always goes along with the informal stuff. And so that change in the formal thing, even though they can still say no, it has really changed, I think, the conversation around it, because now more people are requesting, more people are talking about it, people know they have this right. And it is just opening people's minds a lot. And so I actually see, maybe it's because I work in tech, and I don't know, maybe it's just the place I work, but I actually see a lot of flexible working in my job life. Certainly at Koru Kids, we're extremely flexible. My chief marketing officer only works 4 days a week. My general manager only works 4 days a week. They've done that for years for childcare reasons. We also very frequently have people going off on sabbaticals, not just for childcare. I'm a big believer in flexible working for lots of reasons, not just childcare. So one of our product managers, our senior product manager, just took 3 months off. She's been with us for about 5 years or so, and she doesn't have kids, but she really wanted to go backpacking around India, and this was like a life dream of hers. And so she just took 3 months off, went and did it. She's come back. She's an amazing team person and performing incredibly well. And I'm delighted that we were able to make that happen for her. It was honestly not a big deal. We just had to plan around it. We knew it was coming. It was fine. And I think there's more things like that are happening.
That's awesome. That's epic. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, because we have to change how we're working, because it's not working. Well, it wasn't working, and I think the pandemic has helped. And there's a bit of a rewind of that coming back here. There's a lot of people wanting people back in the office and that. But yeah, I think it has definitely improved. Rachel, if I gave you a magic wand and you could use it to do whatever you want that you think would have the biggest impact in smashing this thing called the motherhood penalty, what would you use your magic wand for?
So can I do two things?
Oh, well, you're the boss. You're the boss. So yes, okay.
Magic. All right. Well, the wand has two ends, right? So I'm going to shake it one way and then the other way. So I'm going to say really substantially increase paternity leave would be one of them, for the reasons that we talked about before. And the other one would be fund childcare properly. And I think if you did those two things together, then you'd get the kind of formal provision of childcare, which allows women to make, and dads as well, it allows parents to make the fundamental life choices that they want to, rather than the ones that they're forced into doing. And then if you equalize or massively increase paternity leave, then you get this kind of quite subtle but very important personal social shift in the household, where the dads are just fully up to speed with everything to do with their kids. And I think there's a lot of the invisible load, both the mental load and the just physically doing stuff load that women have to absorb. And I think it would massively shift that in the home and free up a huge amount.
Well, I love your magic wand. It's got two ends and it's got paternity leave at one end and childcare at the other end.
Yeah.
I think that's perfect. These are big levers we need to pull, right? Like, this is not a tweak thing. I think for me, it's analogous to AI. AI is not going to tweak. It's going to revolutionize. And that's what we need in the sector. Do you know what I mean? So,
Totally.
thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you so much for your time. It was really lovely to talk to you. This podcast was funded by Works for Everyone, a business that is dedicated to supporting working parents and to smashing the motherhood penalty. If this is also your jam, let's stay connected. We're on Facebook and Instagram. Just look for us, Works for Everyone. And if you want more information on how we help businesses put a care wrap around their employees, check us out on worksforeveryone.co.nz. Or if none of these work for you, in the weekends you can find me, Emma McLean, the founder of Works for Everyone, in the queue at Pack and Save Royal Oak or Kmart St Luke's. Onwards!